I'm Abigail Thompson, 32 years old, and I never anticipated that my father's birthday dinner would turn into the night my relatives finally discovered the reality I had carefully kept hidden for years. The very venue chosen for his celebration, an opulent, five-star retreat with chandeliers brighter than our family's collective future, was my property. Yet none of them had a clue. Not even a hint. My sister, Stephanie, stood like a security barrier at the entrance, arms crossed, smugly declaring that someone like me couldn't possibly belong in such a high-end setting. Behind her, my mother leaned in close and muttered, "Don't cause a scene." Her voice still rings in my ears. Then, like something out of a dramatic film, my head of security approached in uniform, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the crowd. If you're watching this and have ever been underestimated by the very people meant to uplift you, drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from. Like this video and subscribe for more stories where the tables finally turn. But let's rewind, back to where everything began. Raised in the suburbs of Minneapolis, I never quite fit the family mold. My parents, Richard and Diana, owned a modest accounting firm that offered us stability, vacations once a year, and every material comfort they thought mattered. My younger sister, Stephanie, was the chosen one from day one. She was graceful, charming, always in alignment with the image our parents wanted to project. Her interests, prom queen ambitions, elite internships, Ivy League aspirations, fit perfectly into the world my family admired. Me? I was different. I had ideas. Goals that didn't follow their script. At 16, while Stephanie polished her college applications and dated the high school quarterback, I launched an online store selling personalized academic planners. My parents rolled their eyes at my efforts. "Abigail, why can't you focus on something realistic?" my mother often asked when she found me working late into the night, designing layouts and tracking orders. "Look at Stephanie. She's networking, planning ahead. That's how success works." Their refusal to take my entrepreneurial drive seriously grew louder when I declared my intent to study hospitality management and business administration. Accounting or law, they could accept. Hospitality? That was an insult. "I didn't raise you to manage motels," my father scoffed over baked ziti one evening. "Hotels? Really? That's a maid's job with extra paperwork." Still, I refused to fold. They paid for every dime of Stephanie's Ivy League tuition and Manhattan apartment. I put myself through college. I worked morning shifts at a hotel reception desk, attended classes midday, then waitressed at a fine dining bistro each night. Sleep was minimal. Determination was constant. Then, everything changed when I met Rachel Winters. Rachel, a professor with decades of industry experience, saw something in me that no one else, especially not my family, had ever acknowledged. "You don't just see hospitality," she once told me after a case study presentation. "You see potential. That's rare." With her encouragement, I earned a competitive internship with the Meridian Hotel Group. While other interns ran errands and fetched coffee, I dissected spreadsheets, observed operations, and noted inefficiencies. I even drafted quiet improvement suggestions, just for myself, until one day, I accidentally left a report on James Harrison's desk. James, the regional director, returned early from lunch, found my notes, and called me in. I walked into his office expecting termination. Instead, he offered me a job. "This is more insightful than anything I've paid consultants for," he said, tapping my analysis. "I want you on my team." Upon graduation, I accepted a junior management role. I called my parents with the exciting news. My mother replied, "Well, at least you won't be unemployed. Though trainee roles aren't exactly impressive." Then she added, "Stephanie just landed a junior analyst spot at Goldman Sachs." I stopped sharing after that. They never heard about my promotion to general manager by 26, or how my loyalty initiative boosted revenue group-wide by 15%. They didn't know I launched my own boutique hospitality consultancy at 28 or that, within a year, I had secured funding to buy my first floundering five-star hotel. The Athena Hotel had become a forgotten luxury, dated rooms, bad reviews, empty halls. But I saw something different. I modernized everything, from the carpets to the branding. In less than 2 years, it had become the most sought-after destination in the Twin Cities. 18 months later, I acquired a second location. 6 months after that, a third, and still, my family remained oblivious. By the time I turned 32, my portfolio included an elite lineup of high-end boutique hotels spread across the Midwest. Among them, the Athena remained my flagship and my sanctuary. I lived in the penthouse, a spacious glass-walled haven overlooking downtown Minneapolis, yet to my family, I was still floundering in some generic hospitality job, barely scraping by. I never corrected them. Partly because they never showed genuine curiosity, and partly because their casual disregard revealed more about their character than my status ever could. My private life remained equally compartmentalized. I shared nothing personal, especially not with relatives who had always viewed me through a lens of condescension. My most dependable ally was Michael Chin, head of security at the Athena and, over time, my most trusted companion. A former intelligence officer with expertise in cyber defense, Michael brought precision and discretion to his role. Our camaraderie grew from mutual admiration and a shared obsession with flawless operations. We understood each other without needing constant explanation. Romantic entanglements came and went. My real devotion belonged to the brand I was building. Every lobby, every suite, every customer interaction reflected my DNA. The employees? They weren't just staff, they were my extended support system, a hand-picked team of professionals who believed in the same pursuit of excellence. Ironically, I'd created the nurturing environment I never received growing up, a space where contributions were acknowledged, progress rewarded, and effort respected. It was against this backdrop that my father's 60th birthday began looming. I hadn't attended any family function in nearly 2 years, always citing deadlines, expansions, or travel. None of that was a lie, but the underlying reason was simpler: being around them was exhausting. However, 6 decades felt like a meaningful milestone. It seemed like the right time to show up. Maybe even begin bridging the enormous chasm between the identity they projected onto me and the reality I had built for myself. What I didn't foresee was how wide that gulf had grown, or how completely it would collapse that night. 2 months prior to the celebration, a text popped up in the family group chat. My mother, ever the planner, was organizing a surprise dinner. Considering Giovanni's or the Athena's restaurant, she wrote breezily. Thoughts? I nearly choked. On my coffee. My Athena. My mother was casually debating whether to host a major event at the very venue I owned. For a moment, I was tempted to spill everything, but something stopped me. Maybe I wanted the reveal to have more weight. Maybe I wanted to savor the irony. The Athena's private dining area has amazing reviews, I replied smoothly. Might be worth exploring. Her response was instant. It's extremely pricey. Likely over our budget. Probably beyond yours too. That familiar sting crept up my spine, but I let it pass. I might be able to negotiate something, I offered. Industry favors, you know. We don't need handouts, she replied briskly. Stephanie has generously offered to cover part of the cost. We'll manage. I clenched my jaw, suppressed the sharp comeback rising in my throat, and instead said I'd make a few calls to see if arrangements could be made. That same afternoon, I rang Jackson Porter, the Athena's general manager. Hey, Jackson, something wild just came up. My family is looking to book a dinner here next month. For my father's birthday. There was a beat of silence, then laughter. Are you serious? That's either fate or poetic setup. Bit of both, I replied. I want them treated like royalty. Book the Winston suite, full premium service, everything top tier. When they ask for cost, quote them exactly 50%. I'll absorb the remainder, but anonymously. Don't reveal my connection to the hotel, at least, not yet. Understood, Jackson confirmed. Sounds like quite the evening ahead. In the weeks that followed, I monitored things discreetly. My mother made several calls, debating menu items, questioning prices, asking about corkage fees. I curated a custom dinner lineup through our executive chef, added my father's favorite vintages to the bar list, and even coordinated floral centerpieces based on arrangements he used to grow in our backyard. Then Stephanie called. That alone was rare enough to be noteworthy. So, you're actually coming to Dad's party? She asked, disbelief dripping from her tone. Of course. It's a big occasion. I heard you somehow arranged a discount at the Athena, she continued. How'd that happen? Not like you're on their VIP list. The moment of truth was there, hanging in front of me. But once again, her presumption kept me quiet. I've done some consulting for industry groups. Pulled a few strings, I answered vaguely. She said, unimpressed. Well, just make sure you wear something decent. The Athena is pretty swanky. I can lend you a dress if you need help. I looked down at the custom Valentino I was currently wearing, selected for a board meeting with international investors, and smiled. I think I'll manage. Before she could hang up, she added, seriously though, Abigail, don't embarrass us. I bit my tongue. Oh, how prophetic that warning would turn out to be. The night before the dinner, my phone rang again. This time, it was my mother. Abigail, we've had to add a few more guests. The Robertsons, you remember Jim from your father's golf group, and the Clarks, who chair the neighborhood watch. Also, Stephanie's bringing someone new. Her boyfriend. Of course she was, he's a junior partner now, Stephanie announced. Proudly the night before the gathering, referring to her boyfriend. Highly impressive. Top of his class and already managing client portfolios. That sounds wonderful, I responded evenly. The Winston suite comfortably seats 20, so we're well within capacity. There was a brief pause on the line. Then suspicion crept into my mother's voice. How would you know that? I looked over the restaurant's layout after. You mentioned it, I replied smoothly. Just wanted to make sure everything would fit. Well, with these extra attendees, we're concerned about expenses again, she continued. You offered to pitch in before, but perhaps it's more appropriate for you to just handle the gratuity for the waitstaff. That way, you can participate without putting strain on your finances. I closed my eyes, inhaled slowly, and counted to 10. Of course, I said with a practiced calm. I'll handle the tip. Perfect, she said brightly. And please don't be late. 7 sharp. You know how your father feels about tardiness. After ending the call, I turned toward the city lights twinkling beyond my office windows. 30 stories above downtown. My corner suite overlooked everything. The skyline shimmered like a crown, unaware that within hours, it would become the setting for a revelation years in the making. I leaned back in my chair, reflecting not just on what was coming, but on why I'd waited so long. There were moments I felt petty, even immature, for withholding the truth. But other times, like this one, I realized the timing was poetic. Their assumptions had painted a picture so far from reality, and they were about to watch that illusion crumble in real time. I dialed Michael. You ready for the plan? I asked. He chuckled, his voice smooth and amused. You sure you want to go this route? Feels a little dramatic. Sometimes the best way to make a point, I said, is to let people walk straight into their own delusion. They've set the stage, I'm just allowing the final act to play out. As always, I've got your 6, he said. Tomorrow will be unforgettable. That night, I rested in my penthouse above the very hotel my family thought I couldn't afford to dine in, let alone run. They had no clue I'd built an empire right under their noses. That truth was about to be unveiled, and not in a way any of them could dismiss. The day arrived like a scene from a movie. A soft snow flurried gently outside, blanketing the Athena's exterior in a pristine sheen. Its Art Deco architecture shimmered under the street lamps. I had purposely told my family I'd be a little late due to a work obligation, which allowed me to monitor their arrival through the hotel's surveillance feed, wearing a midnight blue John Nico gown, understated yet unmistakably high fashion. I sat in my private office adjacent to the kitchens. From the screen, I watched them step through the front doors 40 minutes early. My mother wore her traditional event attire, a decades-old cream suit she reserved for formal dinners and charity auctions. She immediately scanned the lobby, scrutinizing every flower arrangement and marble tile as though performing an audit. My father looked slightly overwhelmed but clearly impressed, tugging at his tie while surveying the ceiling mural, commissioned under my ownership from a prominent regional artist. Stephanie and her date arrived soon after. Draped in black tie chic and oozing smugness, she strode confidently toward the concierge desk like she owned the building. Her gestures were grand, her voice just loud enough to establish dominance. The boyfriend, Derek, followed closely, scanning the lobby like he was attending an investment gala. Jackson, my general manager, welcomed them personally and led them to the Winston suite, where a welcome spread of champagne and gourmet hors d'oeuvres awaited. My mother looked genuinely shocked. Even through the grainy feed, I could tell she hadn't expected such opulence. Elise, my executive chef, tapped gently on the office door. Everything is ready, Miss Thompson, she said. Dinner service is timed. Wine is decanted. Your father's favorite bourbon is stocked for later. Perfect, I nodded. Thank you, Elise. I'll make my entrance now. Following our script, I messaged Michael, who took position near the hotel's main entryway. Then, I descended via my private elevator and exited the building. Looping around the block, I approached the front doors like any other guest. No entourage, no fanfare. Just perfectly timed anonymity. As I stepped inside, several guests were still checking in for the dinner. I stood slightly behind them, waiting for the moment to blend into the flow. The Clarks and the Robertsons had just been escorted toward the dining suite. Suddenly, Stephanie appeared near the corridor, likely returning from the powder room. Her eyes locked on mine, narrowed instantly, and she stepped forward with a familiar expression of smug amusement. Abigail, she said slowly, taking in my outfit, my hair, the understated yet unmistakably expensive diamond studs I wore. You actually showed up. Her eyes flicked over every detail. Wow. You borrowed something nice. Good evening, Stephanie. You look elegant, I replied, refusing to rise to her bait. She tilted her head. Mom thought you'd cancel. Or turn up looking like you came from some budget motel's front desk. I'm exactly where I belong, I said, with calm sincerity. Her gaze drifted behind me, and froze. You didn't, she hissed. Tell me you didn't bring a date to Dad's dinner. This is a family-only event. I turned just as Michael entered through the revolving doors, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit. His presence was magnetic. Before I could clarify anything, my mother swept into view, having spotted the commotion. "Abigail, finally," she said, slightly exasperated. "We've been waiting for." She barely glanced at me. Her gaze immediately locked onto Michael. Lips pursed in disapproval. "And who might this be? We weren't informed of any additional guests." Before I could speak, Michael stepped forward smoothly. "Good evening, Mrs. Thompson. I'm Michael Chin, Director of Security here at the Athena. I just need a quick word with Miss Thompson." My mother's irritation flickered into visible discomfort. "Security? Abigail, what have you done this time?" Before I could answer, Stephanie cut in, stepping directly into my path like a self-appointed gatekeeper. "Is there an issue with her reservation?" she asked Michael pointedly, as though I weren't standing there. "We can cover her portion if needed." My mother moved closer, lowering her voice to that carefully controlled whisper that still managed to project across the lobby. "Abigail, please don't create a scene. If you're having financial troubles again, you should have said something before showing up at a place like this." The buzz in the lobby softened. Conversations hushed. A few guests paused mid-stride, their attention subtly drawn to the unfolding tension. Staff passing by slowed, exchanging quiet glances. Near the dining room, Jackson lingered just outside the Winston suite, observing with barely concealed interest. Our eyes met. He lifted a brow in silent inquiry. I offered the tiniest nod. Michael cleared his throat gently, drawing everyone's focus. "Actually, I came to inform Miss Thompson that all her specifications for this evening have been arranged precisely as requested." My mother blinked, her brow furrowed. "Specifications? What specifications?" Stephanie scoffed. "She probably asked for tap water and the cheapest entree on the menu." She turned toward our mother. "Can we please go back inside? Derek's telling Dad about the new car his firm gave him. It's a BMW. Limited edition." She reached for our mother's arm, trying to steer her away, while still blocking my entrance. That's when Michael dropped the line that changed everything. "Mrs. Thompson, Miss Stephanie," he said calmly, "perhaps you aren't aware that you're currently obstructing the owner of this property from entering her building." A hush fell across the lobby. You could have heard a pin drop. My mother stopped mid-step. Stephanie slowly rotated back toward me, her expression suspended between skepticism and dawning panic. Her voice, when it returned, was brittle. "Excuse me?" Just then, Jackson stepped forward with impeccable timing. "Miss Thompson," he greeted warmly, shaking my hand with professional respect, "everything is ready for your father's special evening. The executive chef prepared all the items you requested, and the 1962 Bordeaux from your private reserve pairs perfectly with the prime rib." My mother's face blanched. "Your private reserve?" I smiled, brushing past Stephanie. "Yes, Mother. From my wine collection, kept here at the Athena." They both stood frozen as I continued casually. "I've been meaning to tell you. I own this hotel. This one, the Meridian downtown, and 4 more across the Midwest." Stephanie's jaw slackened. No words came out, only stunned blinking. My mother reached for a nearby chair, gripping it tightly. That can't be true," she stammered, her voice faint. "And yet, here we are," I said gently. I gestured toward the dining suite. "Shall we join Dad and the others? There's a birthday celebration underway." We began walking toward the private room. Staff along the corridor nodded and greeted me warmly. "Evening, Miss Thompson." "Wonderful to see you, Miss Thompson." Each greeting was effortless, respectful, and unmistakably sincere, proof of who I truly was in this space. Denial had no ground left to stand on. Just outside the Winston suite, Stephanie seized my arm. Her grip was sharp, almost frantic. "Why didn't you tell us?" she demanded, the steel in her voice dissolving into vulnerability. I stared at her hand until she let go, then smoothed my sleeve. Meeting her gaze, I spoke quietly. "Because none of you ever asked." Then I pushed open the doors. My father turned, clearly confused by the commotion. When the staff began greeting me not as a guest but as their boss, the realization dawned. His eyes widened, shifting from confusion to stunned recognition. "Miss Thompson," one of the servers said with a smile, "your table is ready." The dinner unfolded like a surreal stage performance, half the actors working from an outdated script. My father, after an initial period of stunned silence, gradually came to terms with the truth. His shock transformed into something else, something like admiration. During dessert, as guests mingled near the dessert table, he quietly pulled me aside. "So," he said slowly, "this is why you've been so evasive about your career." I nodded. "I own the entire place." His eyes widened further. "The whole hotel?" "And several others." He exhaled, thoughtful. "Why keep it a secret from us?" I weighed my words. At first, I didn't know if I'd succeed. Then, when I did, it became clear none of you really saw me. You had a version of me in your head. Challenging that just didn't seem worth it. He looked genuinely troubled. I suppose, we haven't made it easy for you to share. That's on us. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from him. Before I could respond, my mother appeared, having composed herself. Her tone was brisk again, socially polished. Abigail, the Clarks were asking about those antique photographs in the hallway. If you seem to know everything about this place, my mother said with a brittle smile, perhaps you can explain those photographs to the Clarks. Her tone had the icy politeness of someone barely holding it together. I offered a gracious nod and stepped away, approaching the guests with a practiced warmth I'd developed over years in the industry. As I engaged them in conversation about the Athena's restored heritage elements, I heard my father behind me. Did you know anything about this? He asked, his voice low. Absolutely not, she snapped. She orchestrated this entire thing for maximum effect. Kept us completely in the dark. The rest of the evening played out like a carefully staged production. My mother's mask of composure stayed intact, but the look she sent my way flickered between confusion and betrayal. Stephanie swung like a pendulum, sometimes trying to cozy up to my status, other times withdrawing, clearly overwhelmed. My father, however, seemed captivated, his interest growing with each new detail he learned about my accomplishments. By the time dessert, a handcrafted bourbon caramel cake designed specifically for my father's tastes, was presented, the gathering had effectively split in two. Some, like the Clarks and Robertsons, were full of questions about my career, my strategy, and what it took to build a luxury brand from scratch. Others, namely my mother and sister, sat quietly, unsure whether to be angry, embarrassed, or amazed. Derek, caught between them, looked like he regretted showing up at all. As the celebration wound down near midnight, I discreetly instructed Jackson to ensure every guest received a curated gift basket and complimentary car service. My father approached me before leaving, wrapping me in an embrace I hadn't felt in years. I'm proud of you, Abby, he whispered sincerely before following my mother, whose lips were pursed in unreadable silence. Stephanie lingered behind, visibly wrestling with her emotions. So all those times, she began awkwardly, when we thought you couldn't afford to join vacations or help with gifts, I was building this, I interrupted, gesturing to the glittering setting around us. And I did contribute. Remember that anniversary trip to Maui for Mom and Dad last year? The generous Christmas envelopes? Her eyes narrowed. Mom told us those were from some distant cousin who came into money. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Of course she did. Can't have me succeeding in a way she didn't dictate. Derek joined us, placing a careful hand on Stephanie's shoulder. We should head out. The driver's waiting, he said, turning to me with genuine admiration. This hotel is incredible. You've built something remarkable. Stephanie shot him a glance I couldn't interpret, then looked back at me. We should talk soon. Maybe, I replied, giving nothing away. After they departed, I returned to my office, removed my heels, and poured a generous glass of the same Bordeaux we'd served with dinner. Moments later, Michael knocked softly and took the seat across from me. Loosening his tie, well, he said with a chuckle, that was quite the performance. How are you feeling? He asked, watching me closely. I stared into my glass. A mix of emotions. Relieved. Validated. Tired. Sad. He nodded. Your dad seemed genuinely moved. He did, I agreed. He's always been more reasonable than the others. Just, never willing to speak up when it mattered. Michael leaned back. So what's next? When the shock wears off, how do you plan to handle the aftermath? The question had been swirling in my mind for hours. The hard part starts now, I admitted. The big reveal felt empowering. But I know my family. This is only the beginning of a messy recalibration. Expecting some early morning calls? At best, I said, setting the glass down. Mom will demand explanations or spin a new story where she always supported me. Stephanie will probably bounce between envy and trying to leverage my success for her benefit. And you? Michael prompted. How will you respond? I took a deep breath. By doing what I should have done years ago. Establish boundaries. Clearly. Calmly. No gloating. Just standards. Respect is non-negotiable now. Over the next 2 hours, Michael and I mapped out a measured strategy. This wasn't about vengeance, it was about preservation. Of self. Of sanity. Of potential healing. I decided to consult Dr. Eleanor Hayes, the therapist I'd seen sporadically since acquiring my first property, to make sure I wasn't acting out of reactivity. I wanted my next steps to be deliberate and healthy. Right. On cue, my phone buzzed at 7:03 a.m. the next morning. My mother. I let it ring out. Moments later, a text from Stephanie, we need to talk. Can I meet you at your hotel today? I ignored both for the moment and instead called Dr. Hayes, requesting an urgent appointment that afternoon. By the time I walked into her office overlooking Loring Park, I had 17 missed calls, 24 messages, and an email from my father with just a single line, "I owe you an apology." Many apologies. When you're ready, I'd like to listen. That message, so unlike the barrage of calls from my mother or the chaotic texts from Stephanie, gave me hope. Maybe one relationship could be salvaged. The question isn't whether to forgive them, Dr. Hayes said after I recounted everything. It's what kind of connection you want to build going forward, and what boundaries need to be in place to keep that connection safe. By the time I left her office, I had clarity. This wasn't about shaming my family. It was about finally valuing myself enough to demand more. This wasn't about demanding overdue recognition for past indifference. It was about forging a new framework, one where my independence and accomplishments were acknowledged without question, and old cycles of belittlement had no room to grow. That evening, I returned to the Athena and instructed the front desk to allow any relatives attempting an impromptu visit to be sent directly to my suite. Then I settled into my living room, gazing out across the skyline of a city I had mastered on my own terms. With that calm resolve, I replied to my father's message with a clear invitation, available to speak privately tomorrow at 2 p.m. in my office at the Athena. Just as I had intentionally shaped my hospitality empire, it was time to architect my family dynamic with precision, clear terms, and the unwavering assurance of someone fully aware of her value. True to form, my father arrived 10 minutes early, a lifetime of punctuality from his years meeting clients at his accounting practice. Jackson welcomed him and led him to my office, where I'd arranged his favorite roast and a spread of almond cookies from the bakery he frequented on Saturday mornings when I was a child. "This view's something else," he said, his gaze drawn to the expansive cityscape framed by my floor-to-ceiling windows. "It's why I chose this space," I answered, motioning for him to sit. I needed a daily reminder of what I'm building. An uneasy silence fell between us, charged with decades of missed conversations, unspoken hurt, and all the words we'd never said aloud. Eventually, he exhaled, adjusting his cufflinks as if buying time. "I hardly know where to start, Abigail. I'm still trying to make sense of it all. The business. Everything you've accomplished." He hesitated, then added, "And why you felt you couldn't tell us." I kept my voice composed, factual. "I tried, at first. When I landed my first management role. When I started consulting. When I closed on this property. Each time I reached out, hoping to share a win." He looked perplexed. "I don't recall that." "I do. When I called about my promotion to general manager, Mom said, 'At least it's stable,' then shifted the conversation to Stephanie's new condo. When I mentioned launching my firm, you asked if I had a fallback plan, when it didn't work." His face darkened with understanding and regret. "I remember now. I honestly didn't realize how dismissive we were being. I thought we were being sensible. Realistic. You were pragmatic with me," I said, still even-toned. "But you were encouraging, hopeful, with Stephanie. Different standards. Different faith in potential." He didn't argue. Instead, he nodded slowly. "We knew how to support Stephanie's path. Structured career track. Predictable milestones. Yours felt unfamiliar?" I offered that. He nodded again. "Yes. And I think we clung to what we knew rather than try to understand what you were building. That was wrong." His directness caught me off guard. The simplicity of it, an honest admission, no deflection, struck a chord I hadn't prepared for. I blinked quickly, holding back unexpected emotion. "Thank you," I managed quietly. He sighed. "Your mother's having a harder time with all this. She says it feels like a betrayal, like you staged a performance and left her out." "Because I disrupted the order," I said. "I changed what she thought she knew." "I understand that. But I'm not responsible for her discomfort." He didn't argue that either. "So what now?" I laid out what I discussed with Dr. Hayes. I would continue relationships one-on-one, not in settings where condescension or backhanded remarks thrived. I would share updates on my terms. Any future financial contributions or gestures would come with full disclosure and mutual respect. My time, resources, and energy were no longer up for quiet dismissal or secret rebranding. "That sounds fair," he said after I finished. "More than fair, actually. I've also asked my lawyer to lift the anonymity from a few prior gifts," I added. "The Hawaii anniversary trip. The holiday checks. Contributions to your retirement account." He blinked, stunned. "The extra growth in the portfolio. That was you." "Since the second hotel sale," I confirmed. "I wanted you to have stability. But I knew Mom would never accept help directly." He sat back, speechless. "And all this time, we treated you like the disappointment. The underachiever. You've been quietly carrying all of us." "I didn't do it for thanks or validation," I clarified. "I did it because I could. Because no matter how it felt growing up, you're still my family. But from now on, no more secrets. No more shrinking myself to keep anyone else comfortable. He exhaled. Understood. Our conversation drifted toward lighter topics, the party, the guests, even the dessert. He confessed he'd actually enjoyed the event once the initial shock faded. Your staff respects you, he noted. They weren't just being polite. There's admiration there. There should be, I said with a smile. They helped me build something meaningful. My wife kept saying it couldn't be yours. That it had to be a mistake, a prank. And what did you say? I told her the evidence was all around her. That she needed to see you for who you are now. And how did that go over? She didn't speak to me the rest of the drive home. I chuckled softly. Small price for progress. After he left, promising to reflect and support the boundaries I'd set, I spent the afternoon in a whirlwind of meetings, legal, financial, therapeutic. It was time to structure my future. With as much foresight as I'd once devoted to guest experience and 5-star reviews. With Sarah Jenkins, my legal counsel, I composed formal documentation outlining previous financial contributions and detailing firm parameters for all future monetary exchanges involving family. Meanwhile, Marcus Williams, my financial strategist, combed through my portfolio to ensure that any personal expenditures wouldn't affect operational sustainability. Simultaneously, Dr. Eleanor Hayes helped mentally prepare me for what would likely be the most delicate conversation, one with my mother, whose resistance to change was as predictable as it was daunting. By evening, what Michael jokingly dubbed Operation Family Reset had taken definitive shape. For the first time in years, I felt confident, grounded, and completely in charge of the personal script I was rewriting. I also gave Jackson clear instructions: if my mother or sister arrived without warning, they were to be received politely. But provided with no access to me or details about my schedule. As anticipated, my mother showed up early the following morning, fully expecting immediate entry. Mrs. Thompson, Jackson greeted her smoothly at the front desk, his professionalism unwavering. Do you have a scheduled meeting with Miss Thompson today? Her frustration was instantly apparent, even through the security feed I observed from my office. I don't need an appointment, she snapped. I'm her mother. I understand, Jackson replied evenly, but Miss Thompson is currently in back-to-back meetings. I'd be happy to relay a message or help arrange a time for later today, or tomorrow, if that suits better. A policy so ordinary in any business environment had clearly stunned her. She lingered, agitated, attempting to assert authority. But after several increasingly tense minutes, she departed, throwing one final remark over her shoulder: tell Abigail I'll be handling this matter personally. She phoned the moment she exited the building. This time, I picked up. Hello, Mom. What is happening, Abigail? I stopped by your hotel, and I was treated like a complete stranger. You were treated like any visitor without an appointment, I corrected gently. I manage a business, Mom. I follow a calendar. I hold responsibilities. I'm your mother, she retorted. I shouldn't need an appointment to see my own daughter. Would you walk into Stephanie's office at her law firm and expect to be shown in immediately? The line went quiet. I waited. This is different, she muttered eventually, but her tone lacked conviction. Not really, I replied. My work, my professional standing, they deserve the same regard you've always extended to Stephanie's career. Another silence. We need to talk about your father's birthday, she finally said. As a family. I'm open to a conversation, I said evenly, but not until you're willing to reflect on some difficult truths, about the way you've treated me, and how you've minimized my work for years. This isn't about, it is, I interrupted firmly. I'm not angry. And I'm not retaliating. I'm just setting boundaries that should have existed long ago. In the end, we agreed to meet the following week, with Dr. Hayes present to mediate. My mother clearly disliked the arrangement but understood I was no longer someone she could control or guilt into compliance. Stephanie, on the other hand, proved more adaptable, if not more authentic. She arrived that same afternoon, with Derek and their golden retriever in tow, requesting a personal tour of my brilliant sister's hotel. Her pivot from superiority to performative admiration was glaringly transparent, but I chose to treat it as a beginning. As we strolled through the Athena's corridors, Stephanie flooded me with inquiries about daily operations, average revenue, seasonal occupancy, and brand expansion, clearly attempting to estimate the scope of what I'd built. Derek, surprisingly, asked intelligent questions and appeared genuinely interested in hospitality as an industry. As we stepped onto the rooftop garden, my most recent addition, Stephanie glanced around, seemingly impressed. You know, she mused, we should think about doing something together. My firm is constantly searching for chic spaces to host client events. Family discounts could be a great partnership opportunity. And there it was. The real reason for her visit. Not reconciliation, not curiosity about my journey, but an angle. A strategy to leverage my work for her benefit. I don't provide family discounts, I said politely, but firmly. The Athena offers standardized pricing for all clientele. If your firm is interested in booking space, our corporate events department can assist, just like with any other request. Her expression shifted slightly, the cheerful facade slipping. Surely, for your own sister, I treasure our relationship too much, I cut in gently, to risk muddying it with financial entanglements. Boundaries between family and business protect both. Derek nodded in agreement, earning a narrowed glance from Stephanie. The remainder of the visit passed quietly. As they departed, Stephanie had absorbed the same message my parents were just beginning to comprehend. I wasn't closing the door on connection, but I was no longer available on their terms. That evening, Michael joined me for dinner in my penthouse suite. As we sat beneath the warm glow of the chandelier, I recounted the events of the day in detail. He lifted his glass with a half-smile. Phase 1 is officially complete, he said, toasting gently. So, what's the verdict? I paused, considering his question with care. It feels like, for the first time, I'm steering my own story. Not reacting to everyone else's expectations, just owning my place in it. The upcoming discussion with my mother still loomed large. But unlike before, I felt fully equipped for whatever tension might arise. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't about payback for years of being sidelined. This was about owning my path, reclaiming a narrative long controlled by others. I had finally shifted from being someone whose worth needed constant validation to someone who no longer required outside approval. I had come to understand something profound. The most powerful response to being underestimated isn't shouting your worth, it's embodying it so completely that their doubt becomes irrelevant. The meeting I'd arranged with my mother took place the next morning, not at the Athena, where I held the upper hand, nor at my childhood home, where the power imbalance still lingered. Instead, we met at a neutral site, a private room in the office complex where Dr. Hayes practiced. The setting was deliberate, professional, balanced, stripped of emotional charge. My mother arrived early, dressed in a meticulously tailored navy suit, as if bracing for litigation rather than a heart-to-heart. Her demeanor was stiff, her eyes guarded. My father arrived shortly after, giving me a cautious nod that I interpreted as both an apology and a show of support. Dr. Hayes greeted each of us with practiced calm, then invited us to sit around a circular table where no one had the advantage of position. We're here to build better communication, Dr. Hayes began. Not to reassign blame or dissect every past slight. We'll focus on personal truths, using statements about our own feelings rather than accusations. My mother's eyes betrayed her skepticism, but she nodded in agreement. Following the plan we'd outlined during therapy, I opened the dialogue. My voice was measured, steady. I shared how it felt growing up constantly compared to Stephanie, how my unconventional choices were questioned, how achievements went unrecognized, how every effort I made seemed to fall into the shadow of my sister's milestones. I listed facts calmly, methodically. I worked 3 jobs during college, I began, while Stephanie had tuition and housing fully covered at Cornell. When I landed my first management position, you changed the subject to her condo purchase. And when I called to share I'd started my own consulting firm, the response was, do you have a backup plan when it doesn't work out? My mother's face flushed with a mixture of discomfort and indignation. Her fingers fidgeted, nervously weaving together, then pulling apart. When I finished, Dr. Hayes looked to her. Diana, how would you like to respond to what Abigail has shared? My mother took a deep breath, then replied with tightly controlled diction. I believe there have been some misinterpretations. We always had both daughters' best interests in mind. Perhaps we worried more about Abigail's choices because they seemed riskier. It wasn't the concern that hurt, I clarified, it was the default assumption that I would fail. The absence of encouragement. The constant emphasis on how safe Stephanie's path was, as if mine couldn't possibly lead anywhere meaningful. We gave you a roof over your head. An education. Opportunities, my mother argued, her tone rising defensively. Through high school, my father said quietly, cutting in. We didn't help with Abigail's college the way we did with Stephanie. My mother's eyes snapped to him, the betrayal written clearly across her features. That was different, she shot back. Stephanie's school was more expensive, Cornell isn't cheap. All the more reason I might have needed help, I replied gently but firmly, and so the conversation continued for nearly an hour. My mother rotated between defensiveness and indignation, occasionally conceding a point only to double back with justification. My father, in contrast, grew increasingly introspective, nodding more often than he spoke. Dr. Hayes steered us consistently back to the present and future, refusing to let the dialogue spiral into accusation. Then came the turning point. Why didn't you tell us? My mother finally asked, her voice cracking slightly. Do you know how humiliating it was to find out, in front of friends no less, that you've been hiding this empire from us? That our own daughter has been keeping secrets? I wasn't dishonest, I replied evenly. I stopped sharing. There's a distinction. But why? She pressed, now sounding more bewildered than angry, because every time I shared something, you brushed it aside. After a while, protecting my peace became more important than seeking validation from people unwilling to give it. My success didn't align with your expectations of me, and rather than revise your assumptions, you discounted what I was building. Her mouth parted slightly, as if trying to respond, but no sound emerged. And in that silence, I saw, for the first time, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Something in my composed explanation seemed to finally reach her. My mother looked down at her clasped fingers, silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. I never saw it that way, she murmured. I thought I was being practical, keeping expectations realistic, making sure no one flew too close to the sun. For Stephanie, you became her constant source of encouragement. For me, you became the voice that always questioned whether I could make it, I replied, keeping my words gentle. Both of us needed both kinds of support, just at different moments. My father took her hand, offering a comforting squeeze. She's right, Diana. We treated them differently from the start. We assumed Abigail's plans would crumble and that Stephanie would soar. And that's exactly how it played out, but not for the reasons we thought. Stephanie succeeded by following the path we laid out, he continued, and Abigail achieved all this by carving her own, in spite of the obstacles we put in her way. The air grew still with the weight of that admission. Simple. Profound. Unavoidable. Tears welled up in my mother's eyes, a rare and startling sight. I don't know how to fix it, she confessed, voice cracking under the strain of years unsaid. It begins with recognition, Dr. Hayes offered, her tone calm but firm. Which you've taken the first step toward today. After that, it's about building new patterns, ones based on mutual respect and honest communication. We spent the next hour drafting a new framework for moving forward. My parents agreed to respect my professional boundaries, acknowledge accomplishments without skepticism, and stop viewing Stephanie's path as the only benchmark for success. I, in return, would remain transparent about my life, choosing to engage rather than withdraw. We committed to forming a relationship rooted in who we were now, not constrained by roles shaped decades ago. And Stephanie? My mother asked hesitantly. She's having trouble with all of this too. My relationship with her is its own story, I replied. We'll have to navigate that separately. As the meeting ended, Dr. Hayes suggested a 1-week pause before our next session, to absorb, reflect, and let new understandings settle. My father embraced me before we left, his warmth genuine. My mother approached with hesitation but managed to meet my eyes. Your hotel? It's remarkable, she said slowly, each word requiring effort. If you're open to it, I'd like to learn more about what you've built. It was a beginning. A fragile one. But still, a beginning. I'd like that, I said, and meant it. 3 days later, Stephanie asked to meet, alone, without Derek or our parents. We selected a small cafe midway between the Athena and her downtown law firm. The choice of location mirrored the nature of our meeting, neutral, honest, and outside the old power structures. She arrived with the same sharp posture and designer tote she always carried, but there was a tightness in her expression. As soon as we sat down, she spoke without preamble. I don't get what you're trying to do, she said. All this drama. Making mom and dad feel guilty. Stirring everything up. I stirred my coffee and responded without defensiveness. I'm not causing chaos. I'm just establishing something long overdue. Clarity and respect. They've always been there for us, she said, her voice clipped. For you, I clarified. There's a distinction. Her confidence wavered. I never asked to be the favorite. I know you didn't. But you never questioned it either, I said. You accepted their praise, their financial support, their admiration, while my path was dismissed, my sacrifices ignored, and my accomplishments downplayed. You never asked why our experiences were so different. Stephanie's shoulders tensed. She stirred her latte a bit too forcefully, foam sloshing over the rim. For a long moment, she said nothing. You always seemed like you didn't need anyone, she said at last. So self-reliant, so focused. Like you had it all handled. I became self-reliant because no one was offering help, I explained. And then that same independence was used against me, as proof that I didn't need the very things you were freely given. We sat with that for a while. The honesty between us felt foreign but necessary. The conversation stretched over 2 hours, touching on memories we hadn't revisited in years. She didn't offer a sweeping apology, nor did she fully acknowledge her role in the imbalance. But for the first time, she stopped deflecting and started listening. "I can't promise I'll be perfect about this," she admitted as we prepared to leave. "Old patterns are hard to break." "I'm not asking for perfection," I said, pulling my coat around me. "I just want honesty, awareness, effort." In the week that followed, subtle changes began to emerge. My father called, not to offer advice, but to ask thoughtful questions about my business. He wanted to understand my strategy, my growth plans, even my vision for future properties. His interest felt genuine, not performative. A few days later, I received a handwritten note from my mother, an apology for her behavior at the birthday gathering, followed by a request: "When your schedule allows, I'd love a proper tour of the Athena." It was the first time in years she had acknowledged both my time and my achievements with any genuine deference. Not long after, Stephanie sent a message suggesting lunch. No pretense, no mention of business proposals, just lunch. That evening, during my regular strategy dinner with Michael, I shared these developments. He listened, nodding thoughtfully before speaking. "Positive signs," he said, lifting his glass in a quiet toast. "But be mindful. Families don't change overnight. Old routines have a way of creeping back in." "I'm aware," I replied, steady and sure. "But this time, I've drawn the line. If they backslide, they're doing so knowingly, not unconsciously. I've made my boundaries visible. Crossing them now is a choice, not a misunderstanding." The real test came 4 weeks later, when my mother invited everyone to dinner at their home. It was the first full family gathering since the evening. I had revealed the scope of my success. I went expecting the worst but walked into something different. I in the living room, next to Stephanie's law school diploma and framed articles about her promotion, were carefully placed news clippings featuring interviews with me, photos from the Athena's launch gala, and an op-ed I had written on women in leadership. Small gestures, but ones that represented a seismic shift in perspective. My father, pouring wine, asked for my thoughts on a business he was considering investing in. Not in a dismissive, indulgent tone, but with genuine curiosity about my opinion as a peer. Even Stephanie commented on a recent guest of hers who had raved about the Athena, noting that her client described the service as flawless and unforgettable. But it was during dessert that the moment of transformation crystallized. My mother brought up a charity gala she was co-chairing. "We'd be honored to have your support, Abigail," she said, then paused, choosing her words. "Not because of your wealth, but because the mission might speak to you, given your work with entrepreneurial mentorship for young women." The sentence was small, but its implications were huge. She had moved from seeing me as a source of funding to recognizing my values. From treating me as a resource to acknowledging my convictions. Driving home, the city lights glittered through my windshield, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel weighed down after a family dinner. Instead, I felt calm, grounded. The breakthrough at my father's birthday had been dramatic, yes, but the real progress had emerged in the quiet aftermath. The boundaries I had set, the direct conversations I had initiated, the conscious rebuilding of relationships, this time on equitable ground, the revenge I had once imagined, the fantasy of unveiling my empire and watching their regret unfold, had dissolved into something far more sustaining. Respect. Not the kind that comes with wealth or headlines, but the kind born from finally asserting worth and being met with recognition. The family dynamics were still imperfect. There were occasional moments, my mother subtly comparing charitable donations, Stephanie's competitive edge flashing beneath sisterly smiles. But now, those moments didn't define our interactions. They were identified, addressed, and corrected. Not brushed aside as family tradition. 6 months after that pivotal birthday, I stood on my penthouse balcony, wine glass in hand, the skyline a sea of golden light. Minneapolis glowed beneath me, the city I had conquered without applause or approval. The serenity in that moment didn't come from success alone, it came from knowing I had reshaped not just my business but my relationships. My father had become a regular presence at the Athena, asking thoughtful questions, occasionally offering financial input, not from a place of superiority but as one entrepreneur to another. Over lunch one afternoon, he said quietly, "I never appreciated how far ahead of the curve you were. I was stuck chasing safety. You built something bigger by taking risks I couldn't see." As for my mother, her transformation was slower, but visible. She no longer dismissed my career as a phase or compared me to my sister. There were still times I could see her trying to comprehend what I'd achieved, how I'd done it without her roadmap. But she tried, and that mattered. What made the difference wasn't perfect understanding, it was her effort. My mother had started asking thoughtful questions, expressing curiosity rather than critique, and even visiting my properties with what seemed to be genuine admiration. "I've been telling everyone at the country club about the Athena," she mentioned during a recent call. Cynthia Blackwell practically turned green when I told her my daughter owns it. Yes, there was still a trace of borrowed prestige in her tone, but I'd reached a place where I no longer needed flawless validation. The leap from dismissal to sincere, if occasionally flawed, support was no small feat. It marked the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship, one rooted more in present efforts than past offenses. With Stephanie, the thawing process had been more subtle. The old rivalry hadn't vanished, but naming it had taken away its sting. We'd managed to co-host a charitable gala at the Athena, her legal network and my hospitality infrastructure joining forces. The collaboration had been professional, efficient, and, surprisingly, enjoyable. We actually work well together. When we're not competing, she noted as we debriefed after the event. We always could have, I replied. We just never allowed ourselves to see it. While family connections continued evolving, my business life had accelerated. In the past 6 months, I'd added 2 new locations to my portfolio, bringing the total to 9 high-end properties spread across the Midwest. Michael had stepped into a new role as Chief Operations Officer, overseeing both guest services and safety protocols across every hotel, but the accomplishment I held closest was launching the Thompson Women in Hospitality Foundation. Designed to offer scholarships and mentorship to young women entering the industry, the initiative felt like the antidote to everything I had faced coming up: financial struggle, lack of support, and the absence of role models. The foundation's inaugural cohort of 10 women had started their academic and mentorship programs that fall. Each was paired with a seasoned professional: architects, hoteliers, designers, trailblazing women committed to paving smoother roads for the next generation. You're building the safety net you never had, Dr. Hayes said during one of our regular monthly appointments. Transforming personal obstacles into systemic solutions. I nodded. It feels more impactful than simply resenting what didn't exist for me. In my personal life, something else unexpected had taken root. After years of pushing relationships aside to make room for work, I found myself genuinely connecting with James Bennett, a restoration architect I'd met while updating my Chicago hotel. Unlike former partners who saw my ambition as competition or inconvenience, James appreciated it. He brought his own dreams to the table and respected mine equally. Balance isn't about splitting time equally, he had said early on. It's about giving equal weight to what matters most for each person. That mindset had allowed our connection to grow alongside my professional ambitions, instead of clashing with them. We weren't fighting for space, we were building something with space for both. As the sun dipped below the Minneapolis skyline, I stood once more on my balcony, wine in hand, taking in the glowing panorama of a city I had shaped in my own way. The penthouse door opened softly behind me. Michael stepped out, holding 2 glasses of Cabernet. Admiring your domain? He asked, offering me one. Reflecting on the path, I answered, accepting the glass with a smile. Not just professionally. Personally, too. Do you ever wish it had unfolded differently? He asked. Something quieter? Less explosive? I considered the question. Honestly, no. I think the spectacle was necessary. They would have ignored anything subtle. That dinner, its impact, disrupted their comfort zones. And only after disruption came clarity. Michael nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in that. Speaking of family, Michael said as we wrapped up a strategy session over dinner, your mother phoned the front desk earlier. She actually scheduled an appointment for next week instead of showing up unannounced. I laughed. Well, that's progress in high heels. Later that evening, after reviewing development projections and internal assessments with Michael, I opened my inbox to find a message from my father. Attached was a national feature on women shaping the future of hospitality, my name and face included in a highlighted profile. His note read simply, so proud of what you've accomplished. Not just the hotels, but the foundation, the guidance, programs, all of it. You've created something meaningful on your own terms. That's far more admirable than following a conventional script. Stephanie and I were talking yesterday. She mentioned your journey has encouraged her to explore more innovative directions in her own career. You've changed how all of us see things, more than you realize. I stared at the words, emotion rising not from old wounds or past silence, but from the sheer weight of finally being understood. The power of being acknowledged, not for ticking boxes or meeting external standards, but for crafting something entirely mine. It became clear then that revenge, at least the kind I once imagined, was never what I truly desired. Sure, in moments of pain, I'd envisioned dramatic reckonings or poetic justice. But in truth, what I had always yearned for was something quieter, deeper, more lasting, genuine recognition. Not of bank balances or job titles, but of who I was. Of the courage it took to defy expectations, chart a new course, and rise on my own terms. And now, imperfectly but earnestly, that recognition had arrived. Not through public spectacle or confrontation, but through consistency, boundaries, and the unwavering decision to stop shrinking, real triumph, I'd learned, isn't about making others remorseful. It's about rendering their past judgments powerless. My family's approval, while appreciated, no longer defined me. I had learned to generate my own sense of value, layer by layer, alongside the architectural achievements I'd brought to life across the Midwest. As I got ready for bed that night, my thoughts turned to the young women supported by the Thompson Foundation. Many of them were navigating doubt, opposition, or subtle discouragement from those closest to them. I realized the most meaningful thing I could give them wasn't money, mentorship, or industry access. It was this knowledge: other people's fears should never define your path. Their limitations don't belong to you. So now, I ask you, have you ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you the most? Did you respond with silence? With fire? With unshakable drive? Drop your story in the comments. I want to hear your truth. And if this journey resonated with you, tap that like button, subscribe for more, and share with someone who might need the reminder, because sometimes, the strongest growth emerges from the hardest experiences. And I'm honored you allowed me to share mine. Until next time, remember, success isn't about applause. It's about living fully, fiercely, and unapologetically, on your own terms.